All right, Kevin back with you for another episode of the $1 Million Relationships Podcast. And today I'm here with George Contos. George, welcome. So awesome to have you on the show today.
Thank you, Kevin. Great to be here.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this. I am totally looking forward to this. And I want to start off by just giving a shout out to Ryan Dewey Smith because you and him know each other through your work, as we'll soon talk about. And he's the
We
one
do.
that introduced us. He was on the show a little while back, and he's like, Kev, he's like, you should really interview George for the show too and stuff. And so he connected us, and you and I got to have a conversation already. And here we are. And I'm looking forward to having this conversation today, George.
Likewise, Kevin. Hope I don't disappoint.
You're you will definitely not disappoint. And so what I'll do is we'll just it says Imperium right there over your right. I didn't figure out my right and left here over your right shoulder and stuff.
Right.
And so why don't you just start off by just talking about what you guys do at Imperium and what's your role at Imperium, George?
Absolutely. I've been at Imperium now for just over 4 years or just under 4 years. I lose track. And I have a dual role. I'm with Imperium. Imperium is essentially a parent company. And within Imperium, I serve as a senior executive vice president, and I'm also senior advisor to Ryan Smith, whose title is founding executive chairman and CEO of Imperium.
Okay.
And my other role is I am the CEO of Apis. Apis is a company that lives under the Imperium umbrella, and it is essentially an MSO. MSO meaning Management Services Organization. And what that means is APIS provides the back office core services, payroll, insurance, IT, HR, legal, you name it, to the other organizations, the other operating organizations that also live under the Imperium, the Imperium parent organization.
Okay.
So, which is all under a nonprofit structure.
Okay. Okay. So let's back up a little bit. And how did you end up getting here, George? Because I don't imagine that as a kid, when I was a kid, I thought I was going to grow up and be a fireman, and that never happened. But that was my vision as a kid. But I don't think when you were a kid, you probably didn't have a vision of working for Imperium and stuff. And so how did this
Certainly
even come
not.
to be? How did we get here?
It's a good question. Kind of a long and winding career for me to get to where I am now, which is within the mission-driven nonprofit space.
Okay.
Let's see, where do I begin? Background is law, went to law school, licensed, practiced law for a while. Then that led to some securities licensing. So I'm
Okay.
also experienced in the asset management class and wealth management.
Okay.
What happened was when I was in asset and wealth management, I started focusing on charitable planning, and I sort of subspecialized, and I've got what was called the CAP, a Charter Advisor in Philanthropy designation.
Okay.
And I realized that, as part of growing up, was my family was very active in philanthropy and with our church and with our community. And I guess as I got older, that started to resonate with me. And as I was pursuing my career in the for-profit space, my direction I realized was headed was charitably inclined.
Okay. Okay.
So during my for-profit career at a wealth management firm, I had the opportunity to tour a nonprofit based in New York, which is where I live. I live in Manhattan with my family, which is
Okay.
where I was born and raised. And the organization hit a total chord with me. Um, Resonated, loved the people, loved the mission. Um, about a year later, I started volunteering my time there, and that led to an opportunity to join the board of trustees of that
Okay.
organization. I was on the board for a couple of years, and it was during my tenure there that I met someone who we may talk about a little bit later, a guy by the name of Elliot Green, who was my mentor. And I started to learn all about he took me under his wing, and I started to learn all about the nonprofit universe, governance, operations. And as luck would have it, a couple of years later, I became the chairman of the board because Elliot decided to step down from being the chair, but he stayed on the board. And then a couple of years after that, again, sometimes you say you'd rather be lucky than smart. I uh, I had the opportunity to step in to become the CEO of the
Wow.
organization.
Wow.
And although I did not have the background in health and human services, which is what my former organization was involved in, supporting adults and kids with developmental disabilities, a mission that really spoke to me for whatever reason, because I didn't really have any family or friends who had any sort of developmental or intellectual disability. Um, I was charged by the board, my former colleagues, to step in and be a change agent for the organization. It was a great organization. It had been around for about 50 years. It was large, but it had lost its way a little bit.
Mhm.
And the board, I think, pointed to the fact that although I didn't have the background in human services, I had certain other traits to my personality that would allow me to go in there and be a real change agent, a catalyst from the outside coming in to revitalize and re-energize the organization. And I think that's what I was in fact able to accomplish over my tenure there, which was about 6.5 years, 6.5,
Okay.
7 years. So it was during that time that I met Ryan Smith. Ryan Smith came to New York about 2 or 3 years into my tenure. We clicked, we hit it off. There was a period of time when he and I discussed trying to combine our organizations in some way.
Mhm.
Uh, that did not work because my board was not receptive to the idea
Okay.
based on the nature of the transaction. So Ryan and I, he was living in Pennsylvania at the time. We parted ways, but over the years we kept in touch. Sometimes a little, sometimes a lot. And what happened was toward the end of my tenure at YI, where I was really just getting very, very frustrated with my governing body, Ryan and I started talking about what a position for me at Imperium could look like,
Okay.
even though it had become clear at that point that I wasn't going to be able to bring my organization along
Hmm. Hmm.
for the ride.
Yeah.
And we eventually came to terms, and I said to myself, hey, I was feeling more in my role as CEO at YI, I was feeling more like an administrator. I
Hmm.
had brought some transactions to the board that had gotten rejected for the wrong reasons. And although I was successful in growing the organization, when I got there, we were about a $200 million organization. And when I left, about 6.5, 7 years later, we were a $300 million organization.
A
So we
big
had
company.
experienced some growth
Yeah.
and we had experienced some transactions, but got to the point where um, I was butting heads with the governing body and I was frustrated. And I said to myself, you know what? You're still young. You've still got a couple of next steps to go before you call it quits. So why don't you find something that allows you to pursue the things you're interested in, like growth, like furthering a mission, working with a mission-driven organization that's structured in a way that allows you to do transactions and to pursue things that you're interested in. I knew I wasn't going to get it at YI.
Hmm.
My employment contract was coming to a conclusion, And so I gave notice, and a couple of months later, I started with Ryan at Imperium, and I, and others continued to embark on the growth that he had been very successful in establishing as a foundation. And over the past 3 or 4 years, the organization has doubled in size. We're now approaching $1 billion in revenue, with more to come,
Yeah.
21 states, and we feel really, really good about what we've been able to accomplish.
That's fantastic. I'm really glad I asked you that question, and I'm glad that you went into as much detail as you did, because it really does show how, just our own personal growth, goes through these different phases and different opportunities and different companies too and stuff. But you continue to grow, and you're with an organization now that is just, man, making such a huge impact and impacting so many people's lives in such a huge way and stuff. And it's just inspiring to talk with you and just hear about what you guys are doing and stuff. So, what does inspire you most, George, about the work you do and the impact that you guys are making at Imperium?
I mentioned that I was mission driven because I do like helping people. I do have a for-profit background, so from a financial standpoint, it's also nice to know that whatever you're doing is creating some value monetarily in addition to being mission driven, because I think in even in the nonprofit space, you may have heard the term no margin, no mission.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I think that's where some people get confused and is a bit of a head scratch for them, because it is true, at least in Imperium's case, we as a $1 billion enterprise, which is significant, although we are mission driven and we are a nonprofit and we support other nonprofits,
Mhm.
at the end of the day, we have to operate a little bit, at least a little bit, maybe more than a little bit, with a with somewhat of a for-profit mentality,
Yeah.
because it takes money and it takes infrastructure and it takes assets and resources to keep the lights on every
That's right.
day. And you see some smaller nonprofits and even some larger nonprofits that aren't as focused on the bottom line, and they get into trouble. And quite frankly, it's those organizations that Imperium is in a position to help, because when nonprofits, both small and large, and now we're large enough to help the large nonprofits that get into trouble, which we did as recently as about a year and a half ago. Um, we operate in a very deliberative, in a very efficient, in a very scalable way, and not all nonprofits do. And we're very mindful of the bottom line in addition to the mission. And so we feel that the way we're structured and the way our model works, we're very well suited to help other nonprofits not just remain viable, but also achieve that long-term sustainability. Because there is a difference between viability and sustainability, right? Viability is just your immediate survival needs to keep the
Mhm.
lights on and to keep the bills paid. And there are a lot of nonprofits out there that are viable, that will remain viable, but are not going to be sustainable, which means even though they can continue to operate on a day-to-day basis, they don't have that sustainability piece, which will truly allow them to have even greater and greater impact related to their mission moving forward. Because if all you're doing is scrambling to keep the lights on and to
Mhm.
keep the payroll going and to pay your vendors, that's okay. But then that doesn't allow you to really to truly see the forest through the trees and to execute your mission. And
Yeah.
that, Kevin, I believe describes the vast majority of nonprofits out there. They're remaining viable, but they're having significant issues with their sustainability, and I believe that is going to be a problem that is just going to continue to grow and grow as time goes on.
Okay. Okay. And so what what do you guys look for when you're looking for a nonprofit that you guys can really help and am I right in assuming then that the nonprofits that you guys serve that they are they're viable but they're not sustainable? Is that correct? Is my thinking correct in that?
You are correct.
Okay.
There are some situations where, unfortunately, including situations where we've opened dialogue and conversation with organizations that have gone on for 6 months, a year, sometimes more.
Hmm.
I think the organization that we're going to be affiliating very soon, I believe conversations with them started well over 2 years ago.
Okay.
And for one
Okay.
reason or another, pause, stop, started, whatever. But some organizations, even we can't help because at the board level, and usually the block happens at the governance level,
Okay.
at the board level, board of directors, board of trustees, who are the stewards of the organization. And they're, typically board members of nonprofits are volunteers. So they've
Mhm.
got day jobs. They aren't as engaged. They may want to be on a board for a reason such as the organization serves a family member of theirs, supports a family member, so they've got some vested interests, but they don't necessarily understand the financial component
Okay.
of the equation. So what happens is they all of a sudden they turn around and the organization's CFO or CEO says, "Hey, guess what, guys? Things have not gone so well, and we're going to have a little trouble making payroll this week."
Mhm.
Or we've lost a lot of money this fiscal year compared to last fiscal year or whatever. So a lot of this stuff just hits them, and some of them become paralyzed. Some of them put their blinders on and they don't want to hear it, even though being a director of a nonprofit has real fiduciary and legal responsibility that's
Mhm.
associated with that role. And I think that's actually one thing that many board members don't really understand and grasp the true impact of that there's real fiduciary and legal obligations and potential liability that comes with sitting on a board of a nonprofit. And so in some cases, they wait too long. Once an organization misses a payroll or starts getting shut down by vendors, it's pretty much game over. And even we would be hard pressed to come in and
At that
help
point, yeah.
at that point.
Yes.
So really the organizations that become part of our constellation are those that are either having some potential viability issues because their bank failed to renew their line of credit, for
Okay.
example. That's one instance. Or they're okay for the time being from a viability standpoint, but they understand that moving forward, it's going to be just that, right? They're going to be treading water. They're going to remain viable. They can sort of do what they do, but not necessarily in a great way
Okay.
because they don't have the resources, they don't have the infrastructure to really generate that long-term sustainability to have that kind of impact that they would want. And some boards and some executive teams are astute enough and aware enough and realistic enough to understand, like, hey, we don't want to just do that. We don't want to just tread water as an organization,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
we need help in order to get us to that next level. And that's another candidate that I believe would be ideally suited to join our network
Mhm.
because the attractiveness of our model is that if you're a nonprofit and you want to join our constellation, the way we work is you keep your name, you keep your board. We, of course, have board representation,
Mhm.
which is understandable based on the transaction, but you keep your board, you keep your management team, you keep your name, you keep your identity, you keep your mission. You really operate independently, but now you're part of a much, much larger enterprise that will help you operate your back office more efficiently so that
Okay.
you and your team can just really focus on the mission. You don't have to deal with those headaches of paying your bills and collecting your money and renewing your insurance and making sure that your email server is up and running on a consistent basis. We do all of that for you. And because of our size, and we've gone out to the capital markets and we've raised our own tax exempt debt. And so we just had a very successful tax exempt bond offering raise December of 24. And
Okay.
we're about to go to the capital markets again in a couple of months. So we have institutional level capital at institutional level interest rates that can help finance you and can help you get through those rough spots because unlike your bank, we're not going to pull your credit line because when you become part of our constellation and our finances consolidate, then your loss is our loss
Yeah.
and your gain is our gain and you're part of the family. So we're not going to let a family member suffer and we're not because we're not a third party bank. We're not a lender. We're not a we're not someone coming in from the outside. We're now part of you.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Well, okay, so let's dig deeper into this. And so, what is an example of a result? And you don't have to name names here or anything. You can if you want, but you certainly don't have to. But what's an example of a result you guys have helped a client get? And I don't know if you call them clients or not, but maybe a partner. I don't know. You'll have to let me know that. But what's a result that you've helped one of these nonprofits get that you're just incredibly proud of?
So we call them affiliates,
Affiliates. Okay.
and we call our overall structure a constellation.
Yep.
So there's Imperium and then there's Apis and our affiliates who are the actual operating entities. And that's I'll just diverge for a moment. That's actually another really interesting difference between our model and other models, meaning Imperium was created to be a consolidator, an aggregator, to be sort of a passive parent and because Imperium doesn't, even though Imperium is a nonprofit, it doesn't operate programs. So our affiliates typically operate programs in substance use disorder, in intellectual and developmental disabilities, in youth and family services, in behavioral health, right? They're the ones on the ground in these 21 states that I mentioned, actually providing the supports and services to the individuals within their communities.
Okay.
Imperium does not operate programs,
Hmm.
and that's a difference because in the nonprofit space, what you typically find is that when nonprofits grow and expand, you have a large nonprofit that operates programs, and it will go and it will help smaller nonprofits but it'll typically roll them up because that parent company is an operator. So it'll absorb this nonprofit over here and that nonprofit over there that will usually do the same thing as the bigger company. And then those boards go away. Oftentimes the name of the organization goes away. Sometimes they'll swap out management because they want to control day-to-day operations. That's not the Imperium model because even though at the executive level we have the subject matter expertise, because a lot of our executives are former operators like me, right, who was the CEO of a developmental disability organization, we have the subject matter expertise so we can provide counsel and guidance and help, but we're not there to run your show day to day. That's your business. We'll monitor you, we'll advise you, will because there is financial consolidation, right? Because we're often putting money in, we'll monitor performance, right? We'll make sure that things aren't going in the wrong direction. And if they are, we'll have conversations and we'll figure out how to turn things around. But ultimately, from an operational day-to-day standpoint, it's your show,
Okay.
and that is a real distinguishing factor to
Mhm.
how Imperium operates.
Okay. Okay. Very good.
But so I know I didn't quite answer your question. I'll give you a quick example. Our biggest our biggest transaction to date, which took place back toward the last quarter of 2024,
Okay.
was a large organization, over $300 million,
Okay.
had lost its way. They had some CEO transitions. The board, fairly large board, some of these boards tend to be larger, um, did not have their finger on the pulse. They were getting some questionable information from management, or maybe there were some omissions that management wasn't being completely upfront with. And next thing you know, there exactly what I had mentioned earlier took place. Banks pull their credit lines, right? When you're a $300 million organization, and I think they were in 11 or 12 states, so they were very large and very well known. They were in the Philadelphia area, or rather headquartered in the Philadelphia area.
Okay.
So when things start to go south with an organization that large, they can go south very, very quickly just because of the sheer size and volume and scale of the organization. And fortunately, after several months of conversations where things continued to deteriorate, some of the board members really understood that, look, there's no hope here for us to continue to remain viable independently. We need to do something. And large organization, as I mentioned, very well known. So as you can imagine, there were several other interested parties, several suitors in addition to Imperium that were interested in transacting. But once again, we came out ahead because of the model that I mentioned to you, right? About the organization being able to keep its board, keep its name, keep its infrastructure. These other organizations were service providers, which meant that they were really and effectively going to take over the day-to-day operations. And
Okay.
that's not what the Imperium model is. And that's what, again, differentiated us, made us more
Mhm.
attractive. And
Mhm.
ultimately, they picked us. And, from my perspective at least, they made the right call because working with them, we've been able to turn the organization around. We took an organization that was losing tens of millions of dollars a year, and they recently turned the corner and are now consistently profitable.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. And so now not only do they get to just continue on doing the work that they were doing and making the impact that they were making, but now thanks to this conversation, now I have terminology that so now they're not only viable, they're becoming sustainable as well to be able to just do this long term and stuff.
You got it.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
got it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Okay, so now that we've got some context set here, um, and people know who you are and kind of what you're all about and what you're a part of here, I want to switch gears just a little bit, and I want to start talking about the relationship side of this. So, have you ever been introduced, George, to a person or persons who completely changed the course of your life or your business, so much so that much of what you have today would not be possible if not for this person or persons? And I'm really excited to hear your story and your experience around this topic of relationships.
Absolutely. Never, never underestimate the power of the importance of a good
Yeah.
relationship, whether personal or business, professional, for sure. Um, so there are at least two yeah, and I feel fortunate that I can say at least two because I know some people probably have zero and others may have a dozen, um, but I have at least two that I'd like to share.
Okay.
Different parts of my career, and both these relationships really were benchmarks and uh, really kind of put me on a path that then continued to further my success professionally. So the first person is a woman. Her name is Marie,
Okay.
and she's a lawyer. And I met her a little bit later in life. I was in my probably my late 30s, early 40s, and I had just come off of working for a family business, even though I had my law degree and my law background, and I had started off working for a family business as a result of my father who had become very ill and become hospitalized, and I sort of ended up in that business to some extent by happenstance to help my family. And it was never really it was interesting, but it was never really a great fit for me. So I did that for many years, probably 10, 12 years, and then that my father ultimately ended up passing away and I was kind of at a low point and I was also going through a divorce, whatever. And it was just I just was sort of lost. And but I had this legal background and I had some capacity in that area. So I meet this woman who I had met previously working because I had retained a law firm to help me with some things a couple of years back and I had met this woman through that relationship.
Okay.
And when I was going through all the stuff I just described, and I was sort of trying to figure out my next steps, and I was floundering a little bit, I called her and we had a conversation, and one thing led to another, and we would get together a little bit more frequently to meet, and she was interested. She expressed interest in mentoring me and helping me. So I ended up working for her firm, and it really sort of immersed me in law in a way that I had never really been immersed before. So
Okay.
that got me back on track, which I really appreciated. And, she gave me the opportunity that I don't think anyone else at the time was willing to give me because I was already sort of 10 or 12 years out of law school, right, having come from this family business. But she took a leap of faith
Yeah.
and it
Yeah.
worked out phenomenally and very appreciative. And every time I see her, I'm not in touch with her as frequently as I was, but
Yeah.
I still connect with her. And that's like the first thing that I start with every time I speak to her, like, Marie, you're like the best. You really had
Yeah.
this huge impact on me. It was just awesome. And, uh, and so that led to, um, my next step, which was working for this wealth management firm because I was also interested in finance. And if it wasn't for my background in law and I was working in elder law, so that kind of gave me a good foundation in estate planning and real estate and business transactions. So a little bit of everything that gave me the opportunity to sort of next step into the wealth management and the asset management side of things.
Okay.
So it was at that point, and I referenced this earlier, where I had the opportunity to meet and be introduced to that organization, that other nonprofit, YI, which I was just kind of floored by and really had this had was really touched by and impacted by for whatever reason, right? Just one of those things. Because again, I had no background, family or friend or otherwise within that disability space,
Hmm.
but it just
Hmm.
spoke to me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when I had the opportunity, after volunteering and expressing interest, and then a couple of years into that relationship, I was asked to join the board. I had never served as a board member of any organization before. It
Okay.
was it was you know first time. So, excuse me, when I went to my interview, the interview went fine, went well, but one of the people in the interview was this person I mentioned earlier, Elliot, who was the board chair at the time. He and I just clicked. He was a lawyer, practicing attorney, partner at a large firm, and just super nice guy, gregarious, funny, just very friendly, right? Wears his heart on his sleeve, and we kicked it off, and he knew that I had no experience previously in serving on boards
Okay.
and again, there was just sort of some chemistry there
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
clicked,
Yeah.
and and of course he was the board chair, so he had a certain level of authority where he could make a decision because I'm not sure at the time that the other board members understood sort of why me, right?
Hmm.
I because I didn't have a family member that was being supported by the organization. I I had no board experience, had no
Hmm.
governance experience. Now, of course, many years later, that's changed. I now have tremendous, probably served on 15 or more boards since then, right? So all of that has changed.
Yeah.
But if it wasn't for Elliot, um, that never would have happened. And as a matter of fact, he left the YI board, my former employer, before my tenure ended, before I
Okay.
resigned. But we've always stayed in touch. And what's since transpired is I was able, based on my recommendation, and it's worked out great, to have him come and join a couple of boards of Imperium affiliates. So,
Wow. Wow.
he's continued, so you got to like pay it back, right? Pay it
Yeah.
forward.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, he's continued to practice law and he continues to operate in the charitable field. He represents a lot of private foundations. And so, that was his space.
Yeah.
But I thought it was great, right? And I wanted to keep that connection with him. And I thought a great way to do that was to take advantage of his expertise because he served on a lot of nonprofit boards as well, and he's a great guy to get him involved with Imperium at the governance level, at the
Yeah.
board level.
Yeah.
And he now he's chair of at least I think one of the affiliates or two of the affiliates, and he serves on the board or boards of a couple others within our organization. And he loves it, and it's working out great. And I get to see him more, right, at some corporate retreats and so forth. So it's the power of mentorship, and I try and to the extent I have the opportunity to serve as a mentor to people and passing along my knowledge and my experience and my advice.
Yeah.
um, Always try and do that because why not? And I
Yeah.
think it's really
Yeah.
important, especially if it comes from the heart and you really want to help other people.
Yeah.
You know, having mentors is is critical, I think,
Yeah.
to someone's career and to someone's sort of life cycle. And you hear this, and it sounds like a cliche, but it's true. People do like giving back, right? So if
Yes, they
you're
do.
if you're a certain, I mean, that's a lot of what your business and model is
Yeah.
based around, right? So especially if someone younger in their career, earlier in their career, reaches out to someone, a lot of people are hesitant, they're embarrassed, they're shy, they're tentative about reaching out to
Yeah.
someone who is, much further in their career and successful or whatever. But it's amazing because no matter where you are in your career cycle, someone reaches out to you looking for advice or someone who's expressed interest in what you do because they may want to do the same thing, you respond, right? Like
That's
like
right.
why not?
Yeah.
Why
Yeah.
not? Right? It's
Yeah.
it's it's all about paying it forward and it's all about feeling good
You
about
bet.
yourself. And you do feel good about yourself when
It,
you help someone.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely does. And yeah, and that is such an important insight right there, because I think a lot of, like, say, up and coming entrepreneurs, business people, what have you, they are maybe hesitant to reach out to somebody because they think like, oh, they're so busy, or I don't want to waste their time, or whatever. And but the reality is, when you do ask for somebody's help, man, I mean, like, I know you, George, you would be honored to help. I would be honored to help. And when people just show appreciation for that, man, that just makes you feel really great. It makes you want to even do even more to help them out. And
100%.
and I love the example that you just shared of this gentleman who, he used his position to just be able to really champion you. And I don't know, we don't know how it all played out exactly, but you got the role. And of course, that you getting that role, look what that allowed you to do, just grow as a person, and just, like, pick up all these skill sets because of being in that role. And then later, now you get to turn it around and return the favor by getting him on a couple of boards and stuff. And, like,
Yep.
man, I hear that kind of stuff, and, like, man, that just makes you feel good. And so that's
I
just, what a
agree.
great story. What a great story. So,
I agree.
well, I'll tell you, for anybody that might be listening to this and thinking, man, Kev, I really love George. I love who he is. I love how he shows up. Man, he's just got such a huge heart. And I'm really curious and inspired by what they're doing at Imperium over there. And maybe there's some people that, like, heck, maybe they have a nonprofit organization that they're thinking, like, man, maybe it would be worthwhile to have a conversation with George or somebody on the team over there, or maybe they know somebody else. Uh, any website info, anything we can share with folks?
Sure. Well, the website, which has a lot of information, including our contact info, obviously, and a little bit
Yep.
about what we do and our affiliates, is imperium.org. So
Okay.
it's INPERIUM
Okay.
.org.
And I'll make
And
sure that we include that link with the show notes and stuff. I'll make sure we do that. So,
the thing about us is we will we love conversations, right? To your point about learning new things, knowledge. I'm a huge believer in trying to learn something new every day.
yeah,
Again, sounds like a cliche, but it's true, right? Because it just makes you feel better and
absolutely.
gives you a sense of, accomplishment. Um, and having conversations is what we do because, again, we don't operate programs. We're mission driven. We're there to figure out how to help you operate your programs so there isn't like a competitive thing going on. It's, hey, do you need some money? Do you need some enterprise level infrastructure, right? Because of our size, we have platforms and systems that smaller organizations, standalones, would never really be able to afford or justify on their own. For example, Palantir, right? Very successful company. Their business product called Foundry, Palantir Foundry. We use that as our data warehouse, right?
Okay.
And our to track all our information, aggregate and analyze all our data. We use Oracle as our ERP system. So, these are millions of dollars of investments that we can afford to make because of our size. And all of a sudden, if you're a much smaller organization, 1, 5, 15, 20, whatever million, from a size standpoint, it wouldn't make sense for you to make that kind of investment. But
Yeah.
you become part of our organization now, all of a sudden you have access to that, and it can make you better in ways that you wouldn't be able to accomplish
Yeah.
on your own, just simply because the scale isn't there
Yeah.
and the affordability isn't there, right? So those are the types of things that we can do to help you. And it's just a conversation. We have umpteen, I can't even tell you how many conversations we have that are interesting, but for one reason or another end up not going anywhere, and that's fine because that's sort of life. But the ones that do result in a transaction or some sort of connection um, are can be extremely valuable and beneficial for both sides, right? Because everything's got to be a two-way street and a win-win in order for it to really like hit home. Can't
Yeah.
be a one-way street.
Yeah.
Got to be a
Yeah.
two-way street.
That's right. That's right. Well, George, I really want to, thank you for taking the time to have this conversation. I mean, this has been an amazing conversation, and I really appreciate you. Appreciate your time, and I'm excited to get this out there and share it with folks. So, thanks so much.
It's been my pleasure, Kevin. Thank you.